Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Marco Giardina, co-founder and CTO of Geowox. Geowox provides an automated property valuations for mortgage providers. So fascinated to get into your background, especially because it's so data intense and really excited to learn more about what capabilities founders can take away from the data that they're, either keeping track of, not keeping track of, and really just hear your experience, Marco, on the data side and as well as what you're building and how you got involved into it. And also, the different ways companies can utilize your information to better, prepare themselves or take insights from the information that your company gathered. So, but before we get into all of that, Marco, what were you doing before you started Geowox?
This is an interesting question. First of all, thank you, Julian, to have me here today on your podcast. I really appreciate this opportunity. So before Geowox, I spent, let's say, my career as a data scientist in banks, telecommunication companies, and media companies. The kind of main objective was to acquiring more customers, selling more products or services to them, and try to identify the customers that were worth to retain. So that somehow is what you do in any company, in any industry as a data scientist. So it's what everyone asking you to do.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that process like when a company sets up, say, do all companies set up their data to be taken in the same, or are there ways that they need a data scientist to not only create the intakes of the information that they need to collect, but also interpret it? What's the process like? Are most companies set up or do they kind of fall short in some areas and aren't collecting everything that they need?
And this is a great question. So based on my experience, so I started in late 2011 as a data scientist. And at that time was kind of the beginning of this new era of using data to drive, let's say, sales. And usually when every time I went in a new company, you need to work with what you have, try to figure out where the data were stored, how they were organized. There was, I call this kind of whispered knowledge on how things work, who was in charge, and usually due to the turnover, was always challenging to understand who did what, why was in that way. And every time something, let's say, breaks, you are kind of worried what to do. So what I would say is most of the time you work with what you have, try to make it better, try to simplify it. But there is a lot of work to be done. There is a lot of politics involved in how things are established, especially in a corporation.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, it was kind of a new age in using data to drive sales. Was sales the primary goal for a lot of these companies, or were there other ways that then they started to figure out they could use data to maybe have insights in their business or their spending or the products that they should actually kind of invest more time and resources to? What were the different ways that data was then evolving to be used for?
I think the first goal was always to understand their own customers. So who actually the customer were, what product they have, how much they use this product, what was, let's say, the factor or the drives to sell more, or what triggered them to churn. So, for instance, a very simple example, over communicating to customer, bring them to opt out for marketing communication, you lose opportunity to sell. So this seems very intuitive, but when, let's say, you do at scale and you work, each team work in a silo, they don't realize what the marketing team does against what somebody else do in the same organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And is that kind of a silo from the way data is communicated across teams, or is it, or are we missing pieces of data that isn't being collected?
I think, let's say, usually is kind of a transformation in terms of mindset, because you go from business knowledge what you know, what you think is right. And most of the process mirror this business knowledge to something that a machine tells you to do. So, and there is always this, I don't know, this campaign for the last 10 years. I did this type of activity for the last 20 years. So I know what I'm doing. So I think there is an educational process. And especially when you work in established companies, the good of startups that you create everything from scratch, you basically create the paradise of, let's say, any data person, because you have everything nice, structured, and ready to go. At least you start with that objective. Then at the beginning is all messy, everything breaks, and then over time you come to realize what the complexity is good to start the business, but then you need to spend time to simplify it and make it as simple as possible. That is kind of a difficult job to do.
Yeah. And how were companies doing it before they had data scientists?
I think it was, I don't know, to be honest. It was, but at that time, also data were not available. So I think intuition was the main driver. And then the other things was you were not able to assess almost in real time if you were doing something good or bad. So there was a delay in your action, in understanding of your action. And maybe potentially because you were doing so many things, at the end, basically you got always a positive results.
Yeah. What are the tools that companies use to collect data and then also to store it and then to interpret it?
In my kind of experience, mainly SQL. So you have a SQL database. You have a lot of process done in SQL. You will be surprised on how many organizations rely on Excel still nowadays. And I think that there is also, let's say, something to keep in consideration. Most of the workforce has been in this company for a long time. It's difficult to upskill, let's say, people to use a more technical, let's say, tool or to change the way of working. I think it's a generational thing. Step by step, it became more easy to do. Also, the adoption, how even the recruitment is done for this type of, let's say, professionally is different. When I got my first job, was about, what is your background? Are you able to understand the fundamentals of what you're doing it? Now it's more technical. You have assignments, you have a kind of real projects to do, to test what you like. So I think that we are in a more mature space now, even for hiring.
Yeah. What are some tools that companies use to store the data? With that SQL as well? Are they like the AWS, those types of companies?
AWS, I think maybe is the most common resource for that. So you have different way from storing raw files in a S3 bucket that is, let's say, cheap and functional, and then you build from that. And then it depends on type of data, what is, let's say, your industry about in terms of security. So there is a lot of things to keep in mind when you pick, let's say, the architecture, the infrastructure that you want to basically to deploy for your product and services.
Yeah, and in terms of analyzation and then use of that data, is it one or two main platforms like like AWS that I'm assuming is the most popular, most common? Are there a most common platform that companies use to interpret the information that they gathered, or is it built in within that system?
But I think you have different tools. It depends on preference, I would say, also in terms company preference, but also personal preference. For instance, you have a SQL that is kind of the basics. Then you have Tableau, that is a data visualization tool, was, let's say, one of the first in becoming extremely popular across organization, because is easy to use, is a drag and drop, is a kind of an Excel, a pivot table, but with the ability to create beautiful and elegant visualization, dynamics, easy to, let's say, to move around. And then you have a Python, or at the beginning it was R, let's say, the kind of programming language for building a machine learning model, try to predict future behaviors of customer, of clients, or I think this was a kind of the trilogy. And then with that, so we got the idea of storytelling. Was kind of a skill not requested in the past. Let's say now a good data scientist should be able to tell a story, to make the story visually compelling, to distill the insights in something that is actionable, to engage the audience, to translate in simple terms for the business, because sometimes you have very technical things explained in a very technical manner to a business stakeholder that does not understand what we are telling about. He cannot tell you that he's not understanding it for the role that he plays in the organization. And then you end up in this limbo that nobody does anything, and the project is kind of shut down. The other person gets pissed off because say, why everything works, this person doesn't understand. So there is a lot, I think, kind of educational process in between. And nowadays, the data person, the engineer, is not anymore only an engineer or a data person, should be a bit of everything.
Yeah. It's fascinating. That storytelling component, I can see being so valuable. It's like when we, I went to school at a university that was very much research focused, and it's one thing to have a hypothesis. It's another to collect, the most accurate data, but then interpreting it and communicating where or the insights that data may have and also may not have as well, was a huge kind of leap forward in the sense that it could guide the next bits of research or the next bits of work that was done on that particular topic. So it's fascinating to see that and data scientists and engineers are having to take on that responsibility as well, because I'm sure that they kind of can extract some teachings or some lessons or some what is it called, not evidence, but I always forget the word. It's like archaeologists kind of extract I can't remember the word, but just to extract kind of those facts that come out of it. Before we jump, I do want to jump into Geowox and what inspired you to build a company. But before I jump into that real quick, is with Web3 kind of developing, this whole internet computer with data and information now being stored and kind of a Web3 structure in a decentralized system, is Web3 and this whole crypto movement, is this changing how data is stored and structured and then utilized, or is it just another way to do the same thing in the same procedures that you're already doing now?
I think it can be a new way to do the same things, but in a better, more efficient way, maybe more democratized way, because right now not everyone are able to get value out of it. So it's still kind of early days to understand how this plays in, let's say, in the real life, because you have a lot of kind of dependency from the old world. But it's interesting to see how this evolves and how fast you can create value out of, let's say, data. Because at the end is everything comes down to how fast you are to interpret what you get.
Yeah.
And make action out of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Moving into Geowox, what inspired you to, I was looking at your background. It's not the first company you started and was a founder of, but it's the most recent and I'm assuming the most exciting project that you're working on now. But what made you go into the insights in terms of, property valuations and attacking such I think a broad field that a lot of not only I know here in the U.S. we very much value real estate, but I think globally, land and assets and asset management is a huge space overall. What made you go in this direction? What inspired you to start building software and the platform and things around this type of industry?
This is an interesting journey. So everything, I think, is a combination of Geowox is the result of a lot of things. But maybe to explain it simple is being at the right place with the right people at the right time. So everything started in 2017, basically. So after I deployed the data location project, the main idea was to understand where to do business, in which area. And the project was very successful. And the beauty of it was easy to explain because there was, okay, I go in this city, there is no competitor. There is, I don't know, to open a branch is very cheap, and there is a lot of good demographics that I can capture. So the business understood this, was very successful. And then from there, I started to wondering how we can leverage this location data. And starting to talk with one of my dearest friends, we say, okay, let's explore together what we can build with this. And after doing a bit of discovery, we ended up in looking at the properties, looking at mortgages, and looking at the lack of technology that they basically involve all the process to get a mortgage from the initial application to basically the drawdown. And let's say Geowox has the main goal to digitize the valuation process by making property valuation simply, fast, and right. Because right now the process is not very efficient. There are many stakeholders involved, not able to communicate well what's going on in the process. And this basically has a huge impact in terms of turnaround. How fast can you convert an application? And it's a very competitive market. So usually, let's say somebody's looking for a mortgage, is applying for multiple banks at the same time. The fastest gets basically the client in. So it's an interesting space where has not yet been, let's say, fully embraced by technology, but is now kind of growing this appetite to make things better, faster, smoother.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to think about the whole process and how a lot of us don't even know where that data comes from or where it's interpreted by these different companies where you're looking to get a mortgage from, or property valuations, at least in the US, from what I've learned, are based on, a few different stakeholders. One is somebody looking at the property and seeing infrastructurally how valuable it is, whether there's issues with it or not. And then some people communicate within this database that only, brokerages have access to. And then also to add on the layer that some people use internet data like Zillow or all these other pieces of information that are user based to actually gain those insights and then use those numbers. So what in ways or what partnerships have you kind of created now that you've been working on Geowox for a while that you're excited about, and how are you giving more access to this information, and how does that kind of work mechanically within the partners that you've made?
And this is a great question. So, and as you say, the data landscape is very fragmented when we talk about property precisely, because it's something that very important in the life of everyone. Maybe it's the most important financial decision that each of us will make through their life. And over time, in Ireland, we were able to build, let's say, our own database of property information. So it's basically where all our R&D goes into it, because it's what makes the difference. The majority of the data are, let's say, public available, but are difficult to reconcile or to, let's say, verify because they sit in different places, are not very often up to date with what the property is about. So there is a lot that goes there in bringing the data together, reconciling them, verifying them, enhancing them, because with what you have in the first place is not enough to build, let's say, an accurate valuation process and system that basically is based on data rather than human knowledge, or that use human knowledge in an automated manner to come up with strong evidence to justify that value. So I think it's a combination between the great work that government institutions are doing in making data more transparent, more open, easily accessible, and the work of, let's say, different data providers. You can think about satellite imagery that now starts to become kind of a commodity, or let's say information about the address provided by the companies, or let's say the R&D that the startups like us put in place to solve these challenging problems.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. You discuss kind of the way like satellite information and imagery is used now as a commodity. I was just chatting with a couple founders, and it seems like a lot of different ways information is being opened up to access by not only private companies, but the interpretation of it, and then the accessibility for users as well is an exciting process. And I think it's going to offer more and more kind of progress in a lot of these different industries that, were for better or worse, archaic in a lot of ways, that they were using the information that they had. I'm curious, how many years did it take to not only build kind of the core product, but also get it off the ground and gain traction? And what were some of the exciting milestones once you did, secure your first partnerships? I don't know if you're able to give us those insights, but I would love to learn a little bit more about that kind of process.
Yes, of course. So at the beginning, let's say we start as three co-founders. We were lucky because each of us has his own unique skill set. So I was really on the data machine learning bit, and we have Stefano that is also our CEO that was on the engineering part, and we have Paul that was on the sales part. So we were able to basically going into a client meeting, in a discovery meeting, chat about things and say, okay, we can build this. Yes, we can sell it. How much you will pay for it? I say, okay, we can build in this time frame. Yes, and we make our first sell. So basically, we were able to sell from almost day one. At the beginning, we were kind of data solution, let's say, reports, or the ability to reconcile this information. That maybe is one of the things that distinguish us the most. And then over time, we built all the process to bring us from raw to clean data that foster our models, and then the workflow that help us to deliver valuation at scale. So I think it has been a journey so far. But one, maybe the thing that make us successful was this ability to deliver value from day one. Also, the ability to understand clients' needs and respond to it, have this willingness to understand their pain and map it out, figure out what to do. And one of the decisions that we took from day one was to build something that was good from the beginning. So kind of playing a long-term game. So rather than fixing something that was not good as a starting point. So now this is paying off, but it was a tough choice to make at the beginning, because usually you improve what is in there, and then you somehow are kind of find difficulties to change it or to rebuild from scratch because you are too much into the process. So basically every time we challenge ourselves, how we can make it simple, how we can make it better, what we should not do, and we are also kind of a small team, so less than 10 people. So, but we are able to, let's say, to make a lot of value to satisfy our clients, delivering, let's say, high quality results to them all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would like to ask this question to kind of gauge where things are within the company. But what are some of the biggest challenges that Geowox faces today?
I think is mainly market challenges. Now the scenario is kind of changing rapidly. We are also seeing what is happening almost everywhere, not only in terms of the economic situation globally, but
Yeah.
also the decision that the big companies are making today. And we are kind of playing in an industry that is not well known for making speedy decisions. So we are enterprise sales. Let's say the lending space is very regulated, so is not a fast, easy sell. But we have a kind of the foundation. We have the right product. I think this is the right time to let's say innovate in this industry. And property is something that is kind of agnostic in terms of market condition. So, because let's say in our case, we is always important to understand the value of a properties. So, regardless of the condition, because in good time you want to understand in a kind of a speculative mindset. In bad times, you want to understand what's the real value of the thing.
Yeah.
So we are kind of in a lucky enough to have this agnostic product.
Yeah. What's if everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Geowox?
We are working to be the dominant valuation provider in Ireland. That is our core market. Of course, after we achieve this milestone, we look with interest to expand abroad. But first things first is, let's say, the main goal is the Irish market.
Yeah. I would like to ask, I know we're coming to the end of the episode here, but I would like to ask, from my founders or my guests, what books or people have influenced you the most, whether it was early in your career or currently now, instilled in your values or your strategy or your beliefs?
This is a great question. So let me think 1 second. One of the books that I'm reading over again is the Almanac of Naval. So I really like this book. Every time I read it, I found something different that catch my attention. And it is nicely structured, so it works somehow in pillars. I love it because it's the brevity of let's say each sentence is already distilled just to take in to make you think. For instance, I was kind of preparing for today's episode, and I got one phrase that is at the beginning of the book: pick an industry where you can play a long-term games with long-term people. And reading it, you say, this is somehow basically what I'm doing, what happened to me. So it is a very interesting book, full of, let's say, good lesson to read and somehow think about.
Yeah. I love that. Well, Marco, thank you so much for being on the show. And last little bit, I would like to have my guests give us their plugs, especially their website, their LinkedIn, their Twitter. Where can we find you and where could be a part of the vision of Geowox? And if I'm a client, where can I get involved?
So you can find us at geowox.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Marco Giardina, and just feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Well, I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show, Marco. I really appreciate not only your insight early in your career and with data and how the company kind of transitioned and evolved through using it and the different insights that they're gaining, but also, the way that you're building for a long-term vision. And it's really exciting to see the focus and the access that's coming about in this landscape. And then how companies like yourself are taking that access to information, helping other businesses interpret and use it for their own success. So again, I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.